to be here. Welcome, Klaus and Alyssa Hansen, who are both super strong community development, economic development champions, and I enjoy working with on almost a daily basis. So with that, I'm going to hand it right over to them to talk about welcoming communities.
Awesome. Well, first, we kind of scripted it so we could just chat with each other and chat with you. So we want it to be a dialogue. So if you have questions as we're going along, please ask. But we're also going to ask you questions. But first, we'll just talk a little bit about ourselves, like who we are and what we do. And I'm going to ask Benny to please go first.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it's great to be with everyone here and to get to do and yeah, so I am Benny Krause. I am the executive director of LEAD for our state affiliate of a national organization called Lead for America, of which I'm one of the co-founders of that as well. Essentially, our mission is to support the next generation of leaders and returning and reinvesting back in their hometowns and bringing that extra talent and capacity and energy and perspective to help communities realize what we consider their magic wand challenges. So if you had a magic wand to significantly transform or build up the vision of your community, what would you do with that? Core programs that we offer a 2-year paid fellowship that brings recent college grads back to their hometowns to work on some of those key magic wand projects. So a living testament to that is actually we've got Amber Lewis, one of our fellows who began just this summer working with Alyssa and Northspan and doing welcoming communities and broadband related work as part of. And I also got to give a shout out to my colleague, our new director partnerships, Anisha Zak, who is also here. We have traveled up from Waseca, which is my family's hometown down in southern Minnesota, and so glad to be with you for these 2 days.
Yeah, thank you. So now I have to try to live up to that. But my name is Alyssa Hansen. I'm the president and CEO of Northspan. We're an organization that offices out of Duluth, but is rarely in Duluth. I happen to live in Duluth, so we spend most of our time in the 7 counties area, but we also do consulting around, truly around the country. And in the programmatic serve our community, we help to power, we like to say, some of the programs that I'm talking about a little bit today, which is North Force, as well as which started in 2013, it's been around for a long time, and it's come and changed and moved and ebbed and flowed with the economy. And then also Northeast Minnesota Welcoming Communities programming that's just launching for the 7 county area. So it's no small feat, I guess, but I've also only been in this role for 3 years. Northspan was started in 1985, and I'm only the 2nd president in the organization. So it's been a big change for our organization and for our communities that we work with, and really kind of exciting to see how we dig in and what we can do. We spend about half of our time in that consulting role and the other half in this programming role that kind of focus on the conversation today.
Yeah. And you know, it's cool to see or hear you talk about the timeline, because like if anyone knows Alyssa at this point, like the portfolio that you all have is just huge. And I know you're starting this welcoming communities work now. Curious what prompted that and the timeline or origin story of why do welcoming.
Yeah, perfect. Great question. So it's interesting because when I was in a former role in 2013, when North Force was started, I was at Apex, who you've met and seen some of our partners here today. And it was really stemmed from, and Ian talked about in another session around workforce needs. That hasn't changed, right? In fact, it's probably only been exacerbated since 2013. But what's been interesting in that role and how, as that program has changed, is how we connect to people and who are those people we're trying to connect to. And that it's interesting, we didn't start with welcoming and then build out North Force. So how that programming has kind of enfolded itself and continued to build. So the North Force program is really around connecting professionals who are looking for work, and that word professional is loose because a lot of people don't identify that way, to employers, and also connecting employers to people. with people doing that. We like to say boots, not bots. So we have a system that is a web-based platform that does connect people to jobs, but we also have staff consultants that work around the region to connect people. And then we started to really dive into how we connect students through mentoring one-on-one. And as all of us have experienced in the last 18 months, we couldn't do a lot of one-on-one. This is one of my first ones back in the real world. And so we transitioned that to Student Connect, which is now serving 13 campuses across 10 counties, connecting students with our private employers. So just really figuring out how that ebbs and flows. And then out of that, and kind of baked into that Student Connect part, was this much larger concept of in industry, business, economic development, community development, across pretty much any industry we can talk about, hospitality, et cetera. How are we welcoming those new community members, regardless of their background? Are they veterans? Are they from our BIPOC population? Are they elders who are still trying to find work and they might be over 65, so 9 to 5 doesn't work? Or are they people living with disabilities in a variety of different ways? So welcoming from all angles, not just race and ethnicity, but really to anyone that wants to be in our communities and be a part of that community.
Yeah.
And that's where Lee from Minnesota was introduced to me. So
Yeah, and I I know the question is like, when were you introduced to welcoming work? It's a very personal story for me too. So just a little bit about like who I am as Benya person. I say home is a split between Waseca, Minnesota and Bangkok, Thailand, but my dad grew up as one of 9 on our family farm. It's been there for 6 generations. My mom also grew up on a farm, but in northern Thailand in Chiang Mai. And they met because my dad did Catholic relief services at the Thai-Cambodia refugee border in like the early 80s. And then met my mom. She was a college student at the time, had never been to Minnesota until she came for the wedding and got married at Sacred Heart Church in the heart of our downtown. And then had me and my brother in Thailand. But I bring that whole story because that question of like, when and why did you start doing welcoming work? I truly literally only exist because my dad's family, who had never had a non-white person ever be introduced as like a significant other to the family at all, ended up, I have some wild stories of how my uncles like took her out the night before her wedding day, and like, whether you were, and English is not her first language, but just like the way that brothers can like totally welcome a new woman to Minnesota, to Waseca, and then ultimately to our family. That was kind of the start of what is this welcoming culture. And so there was this first piece of like welcoming you to our place and to our family. And I'm giving the rosy picture, but there were some, challenging parts of that too. But then some stories that I only came into understanding actually when she had her first son. So my brother, she didn't have anyone. Her older sister, her mom had died. Her older sister didn't have any kids. She didn't know at this time they were living in Thailand. She didn't know how to raise her first child. And so my Aunt Debbie, who had only grown up in Waseca, ended up coming to Thailand to help teach her how to raise her son. And I give that example of welcoming because it's reciprocal. It is like welcoming you to our culture and traditions, and also how can I be curious about what is yours, and how can I also come to you and figure out what it is that you need, and not just expect you to absorb into our culture, but also like lean in and like get excited about what Thailand has to offer, what your traditions and what makes you special, and where you have need and how can I serve it. So that's a personal background of like why this welcoming work is so important to me, is because quite literally I wouldn't be back here, and I wouldn't be alive, and I wouldn't be back here in Waseca if it weren't for acts of welcoming that have inspired me to investigate like what does that mean for me. Today, programmatically, I mentioned we have this 2-year paid fellowship program. It's to recruit young talent that might have gone away to be able to come back to Minnesota. And instead of seeing their places as, oh, there's nothing to do here and there's nothing I can do about it, let's actually craft a whole project scope for you to be injected back into that community and work on those things that might have pushed you out. In some cases, it is literally returning back to your hometown. In other cases, it's like returning to your home state. Or this year, right now, we have someone working in Worthington or serving in Worthington. He actually grew up in Texas, but he spent his summers in the Midwest, right on the Wisconsin-Minnesota border, taking care of his grandpa. And so wanted to find, like, was intrigued by the Midwest. But like part of our onboarding for him as a fellow is like, here's how you equip your tires, and here's what like winter clothes you're going to need, just like approve a financial aid request. I was like, we gotta help get him, sweaters. So when we do this pitching of trying to get fellows to move to Minnesota or to move to a rural community, we pitch it of like, here's this opportunity for you to make a difference. Here's a dynamic site supervisor who's on the same page of like, here's what this town and place can be. But then we also have to start looking in every community of, okay, maybe it is still like 90% white, and this is a person of color moving in here to the fellowship. Beyond just the host site placement, who in the community is going to help shepherd you and get you connected? So that is, we have 30 fellows serving all across the state. We are also pretty new. We launched our Minnesota chapter just 2 years ago, allowed me to come back home to Waseca and build our state affiliate here. But we're also starting to look at now, how can we support our fellows to also be creating these welcoming communities and essentially have a place for communities to gather and talk about what is, what are the common values that bind us, especially in a time where like so much of cultural war tells you like what someone ought to believe in or what they stand for before you actually get to know your neighbor. And again, the way that like my family did with my mom when she first came here.
Yeah, so I'll give a little personal background too, and why welcoming is so important to me, but also why I was so supercharged to bring it into what North Bend does. So I grew up in Nisswa, Minnesota. Some of you probably are familiar. It's a tiny town, and I literally grew up teacher, or my parents were both teachers at that elementary school. So I'm used to being in a community that's about 2,000. I started cleaning cabins when I was 12. So, and then small town retail, like constantly wanting to welcome all these tourists to our community. It was the way we were going to survive. And just so that customer mentality, I hadn't really even thought about like how much hospitality does welcoming in our communities. And then went away for college, like we're all supposed to do in my generation. I'd spent some time in Los Angeles and New York, and moved back to Minneapolis, and finally was really, I mean, if I would have had an opportunity like Lead for Minnesota, I know I would have found that place. But I finally got back to the Brainerd area and started working in economic development, trying to figure out how to like turn the private business world I'd been in for so long into some passion work. And through that, I had started to get some connections into the Duluth area, and I had wanted to live on the Lake Superior shores since I was a tiny child. But it was really hard for a relatively privileged cisgender white woman. I lied on my application to get an interview in Duluth as to where my address was, because I tried for 3 years to get an interview in Duluth and couldn't because I didn't have a Duluth address. So it was not easy. Like I didn't feel welcome, even though I knew I wanted to be there, and I was really diligent and like did it anyways. I ended up living on someone's couch for like 7 months, and I was 33. I wasn't like 21. And that's an experience that's really similar for a lot of people moving out into our more rural communities. And Duluth is not rural compared to where I grew up, and some of our other communities. So it's difficult. It's difficult still to find housing. There's a lot of barriers. And so how do we make it easier? And I had an opportunity about 6 years ago. I am now a recovering Duluth City Councilor. But in that time frame, while I was serving and ran and served, what I really started to notice at a deeper level was the disparities we had when it came to welcoming or feeling welcome in our community. And not just in Duluth, but in all the communities that I worked in. And that everyone, we've heard this a lot, everyone talks about how to do it, but we weren't figuring out what to do. Like, okay, we talked about this so much, what does action look like? And so starting at North Span, Tony Surdich, many of you probably know at Northland Foundation, as soon as I accepted the position, said, "So are you up for welcoming work?" And I said, "That's why I applied." So in other regions, we were, some of the words in our little descriptor are best practices, which I think in welcoming work is really weird, that term, because every community has to figure out how they want to welcome people into their community. It's going to be wildly different. But how you prep to do that, I think there are some best practices, and how community connects and figuring out where to tap in. So we spent a lot of time talking to Region 9 and Region 5 in the southern kind of central part of Minnesota, who've been digging into doing tactical work in that area for a good 5 to 8 years, and have started to build out just this burgeoning new part of the connections that we can create in programming in Northeast Minnesota, with the first thing happening next Wednesday, the Equity Summit that is virtual from 9 to 11:30. So some exciting things to come, I hope, in our communities that are trying to figure this out.
Well, before we dive deeper into some of the strategic questions, we want to know what is just helpful for us to have our conversation be wrapped around. So why don't I just take a minute, if you're alone at a table, maybe flock to a spot. Not to throw you on the spot here, Nisha. But if you can just go around and introduce each other at your table, name, org, and then how you are connected or know each other in terms of, the work, particularly around welcoming communities, what you want to be doing, what you're already doing, but kind of what are some of those connecting threads that you can just talk about at your table. And then we want to hear it so we can
Give you 5 minutes.
Yeah.
5 or 7 minutes to talk amongst yourselves.
I just wonder. Shall we start at this table here? If you want to just name like what was a through line of conversation around the work that you all do and who you all are.
Well, immediately, these guys had a connection with what their community and what his agency do or does. And we try to draw that connection to all of us who are talking and why we're all depending on each other to recruit people and try to bring them into our rural communities.
Recruiting workforce. Awesome.
Gonna keep going. We're hoping we can hear from every table.
That's enough, Brett.
Yeah, she took notes.
She took notes. I like that.
Overachievers.
Okay, so what we talked about is probably what I'm most involved in is just in the real estate industry. A lot of times we're the first point of contact when people are considering moving to an area. You know, they're asking, a lot of times they're not just looking at one area, they're looking at different areas in the same region. And a lot of times we're the ones that are kind of guiding them and answering a lot of questions and just kind of letting them know that you can do more than just go fishing here. You know, there's a whole community of folks and different experiences that they can have here, maybe that they couldn't have in this area over here, so they need to come here. You know, we've got folks at the table from LEAD, from IEC, from one of our local lenders, and we all kind of work together to convince folks that this is the place they want to be and try and connect them with services and all kinds of things when they first.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay. I feel like our table is kind of a table of, not necessarily professional connections to welcoming, I'm sure there's some of that, but just like those personal ties to welcoming, like being involved in the community or their churches through their friends, and how and where are people feeling welcomed and connected, and how can we be supportive of that? And then also we shared, like we heard some experiences of being welcomed by other communities and how that feels, and wanting to, I guess, extend that.
Back in the back. Yeah. Yeah, then we have one more.
So two common themes were who gets to define community and the difference between welcoming and belonging.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. So all the way back around. Right.
I know you guys heard my voice last day, but this is something I think is really a little too far out there. But looking around this room, it's just so impactful that there are so many people that this is your day job, this is your job, and that's wonderful that you're in this space. But part of the challenge I see with welcome communities, especially in our community, is that often the people who are not in the room are the ones that really need to be here. And so while I love that you guys are here doing this work and passionate about this work, I encourage you guys also tomorrow to step outside your comfort zones and go into some of the other sessions and try to grab those neighbors that need to be in that space, talking about this conversation and really understanding where we need to go to be here. Because that's kind of our goal, is we want you people, all of us, that are passionate about developing communities to continue to bring people into that fold, that this is their natural habitat, and they need us to encourage them to be here with us.
Both sides to the left and then to the middle and front.
Well, the main point here was I was born in this community, and the rest of my table was not. So that was
We're mainly trans.
Yeah.
But to piggyback on Tamara, yes, we all in some capacity in our work, in our day, to serve that welcome. We serve that, we serve our community in that capacity. And I love the point, and I'll just use United Way. We're having conversations with our community partners, our agencies that we fund, monthly conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's turning into a community of practice. So we're sharing life experiences and we're bringing in unexpected partners to speak about their experience, including for-profit. So, thanks. Last but not least.
So, at this table, what we talked about are the comments we hear about our welcome. And you combine that with challenge. Difficult times welcoming non-white people. Those are challenges we need to think about. Will be a time when we're not the only white community left in Minnesota.
Yeah, absolutely. That leads so well into the kind of concept or conversation piece that we wanted to hit on next. We knew you'd come up with it on your own without us even saying anything, but feeling that we really are at like a strategic juncture, a tipping point, right? Like even in many of our communities, our general population might be somewhere between 5 to 10% and that BIPOC population, but in our K through 12, many of them are either minority majorities or at least 20 to 30% Black, Indigenous people of color. So that change is here. It's not coming, it's here. And so not only do we need to be thinking about our veterans and elders and people living with disabilities, but the BIPOC population that is here in our youth right now, we're trying to figure out if they're even welcome in our communities and what it means to welcome youth, which I could talk about for 12 days, how different that is than just welcoming professionals, not only from those different underrepresented groups, but also just our general majority population. If you're a white woman that's working in engineering or the mining industry, we have many stories where they've moved to our area and then left the profession. They maybe stayed here, but aren't doing engineering anymore or not working for a mine. So there's so much work to do in that area. And I'm gonna ask Benya a question like, what is our window of opportunity right now? And what might be some of the negative consequences if we do nothing of inaction?
I'm gonna cheat and say Alyssa has notes. I'm just gonna read them because they're so good. The first answer of what's our window of opportunity is now, every day. And what are the negative consequences of inaction? Be a dying community. And I'm just gonna read it like that because like that is, I mean, what the stakes are, right? And I think too with this window of opportunity, I think Alyssa, your work does so much around like what are the very real impacts of workforce? Like how can we recruit and retain businesses here? You know, down in Waseca, we have this incredible startup robotics automation company, and we are fighting to keep them there. And part of the conversation is not just around how much tax credit you can have around their new construction. It's around, you know, how do I get this guy who grew up in Waseca is dating a gal who is from Waseca, and like both of them are deciding that it's not a community that they want to come back to, right? And so the pitch now to keep and retain companies is beyond just the like physical like needs you can provide. I mean, that's critical, right? Childcare, you know, housing, that is so critical. And I think also another piece, and what I'll speak to, because I think you're very well positioned to talk about the real material pieces. I think also part of that conversation, what affects the real material pieces is to the point in the back, it's not just about welcoming, but belonging. And so I think all of us can kind of answer that question, like when do we feel like we belong to a place, right? And I think I would answer that as saying belonging comes from a place where you know the stake of your future is wrapped up in the future of your community, where you know that your community feels a sense of responsibility for your well-being, so are willing to, you know, invest in things like childcare, are willing to invest in your schools, are willing to invest in housing. But then I think it's reciprocal. I feel like I belong to a community when I feel like if I leave, I'm gonna let somebody down. Like, I feel like I belong to a place when I know I've been on so many boards and committees where if I leave, actually, like, it's like, oh my gosh, people will miss me. This critical thing for our community can't be completed if I'm not there. And I think that is a sense of belonging that has been the economic and community engine for rural communities. I'm reading this book right now on the history of co-ops in Minnesota, and it is stunning that we are part of such a bold history. When we talk about some of the material challenges we have right now, right, it's not new. We were, as rural communities, facing the crisis of economic systems that did not provide affordable prices to farmers and to merchants, right? And we came together and said, we want to create community grocery stores. We want to create, we're not gonna wait for people to bring power and electricity to our communities. We're gonna create that system. And now we're starting to hear rumblings of that for broadband, which is cool. But it's like this spirit of cooperatives. And when you like look at also what did it take for communities to say, we're gonna figure out how we can address these material challenges, you had to know and trust your neighbor. So to this question of what is the strategic juncture, I moved back to Waseca from Boston, where I went to college, in large part because I came home for a summer and finally learned about the history of my family and how my Grandpa Jim and Grandma Vivian, when the Great Depression hit, their family opened up the farm and let anyone who was looking for work to just sleep at their house and in their barns and get free food for just providing work and feeling dignity in the work that they were doing. The Waseca that I've come back to right now is honestly kind of far from the vision and stories that my grandpa described to me. I live in this awesome apartment that is like this multi-use like building in the heart of downtown, and it has apartments there, and like people don't talk to each other. We go and take out our trash, and like in some cases like people are scared to say hi, right? So I think what's our window of opportunity? What are the negative consequences of inaction? I think we are seeing, especially with pandemic, people feeling this crisis of social isolation. You feel it in the urban areas, and rural communities have this like edge to say, we come from this rich history of working collectively together where we know our neighbors, but we also have to ask ourselves, is that actually what we have in our rural communities today? Or are we also not aware of who our neighbors are? And so I think if we can restore that sense of like knowing, like the actual individual work of knowing who your neighbors are and working block by block, I think that's part of the equation here. And having people feel that you're not just here to take from a community, but now rural communities, we can say, yeah, we have all these critical challenges, but here are the groups, the committees, the associations that are rich and thriving, that if you are a part of, you can be part of answering and taking on that solution for your community.
Yeah, and we want to leave some time for questions from you guys, but I want to kind of just roll on top of that. And we've been having, and Amber's been leading a lot of this, so my person in the audience, having conversations across the regions with different people around what is welcoming or belonging, like what does that mean to you, what does that look like? And I love asking about what it looks like, because then you actually hear stories from people. And she's met with, they're all people from all kinds of different backgrounds. And like this kind of folds into, I think, one of the questions we had written to each other is, what are bold new risks we could explore or take that push into welcoming in our communities? And what we've heard is people want to see colors, and they want to hear music, and they want to be like, oh, like you can be down here. This is a place for you. Like it's obvious. And that's in colors. That's like, you know, not all the buildings are Finnish and Scandinavian, black, brown, and gray. But they might have murals, and they might have colors in the windows, and that is different, and that feels really bold. If you go into a smaller rural community in Minnesota, and there's buildings that are pink and yellow and red, people are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But that's what people want. And when you think about like downtown Havana in Cuba, colors everywhere and how vibrant and how that creates conversation on the street versus that just must walk past everybody and get to my financial office. It just changes the way community feels and how they feel welcome on the streets and just even hang out, especially for our youth. I find it so interesting in many of our communities where it says, no skateboarding, no skateboarding, no skateboarding, no skateboarding, but there's no skateboarding park either. And that's just like one tiny example where like, we're not showing you where to be, and we're saying you're not to be. And then what I loved about the title here, you know, what can your community do to lay out the red carpet? What did it say? I'm sorry. Beyond ribbon cutting and potlucks, what can your community do? And what I wrote down specifically was potlucks and Hotdish. Because until now, in our house we've been in for only 3 years, I haven't known my neighbors since I was 6. This is the first time that I know everyone that lives on my block. And I'm 43, for those who thought I was 20, I love you. And so that was interesting for me to think about that. Like, when was the last time I had a conversation or a beer at the campfire in the backyard with my neighbor? It wasn't since I was 6. And we lived on a cul-de-sac in the middle of nowhere, north of Nisswa.
Yeah.
And how much that means to me, like to have that connectivity in my community, and how much that Hotdish or potluck can really change the feeling of belonging.
Yeah. A story off of that, in June, my mom and I worked with a wine cafe in town to take over their commercial kitchen for a night, and we did a Thai pop-up. And we thought we were gonna have like 30 people, and on the day of, we had to purchase food for over 100 people, and then more than 200 people walked in and out of there. And what was so cool about that, and it was wild. It was like me, my dad, my boyfriend, my mom, and me, 5 of us in the commercial kitchen, like doing everything from busing to like waiting on tables, all of that. And what was so cool about the waiting on tables or bringing the dishes out is I could explain that the curry dish was not a soup, but in fact curry, and this is how you eat it, and you put it on top of your rice. And just that kind of exchange was so awesome. And it was like so cool to have my mom also know that like people like appreciated like this culture that she brought as well. So I think there's some spirit of like, just do it. And earlier, you know, I was talking about our history, not in a nostalgic sense, but as like this is baked in our DNA. It's not something new that we need to learn, right? We can tap into who we are and be thinking of, okay, in today's context right now, what does it mean to make somebody feel valued and like they belong here? And, you know, I think platforms like what Northspan has built that can help make those connections in a 21st century way is critical. And also, I think the next piece of retaining talent is employers also need to be mindful, I think, of what is the civic sense of belonging, and do my employees also feel the sense of responsibility to this place, and how can I open the door and connect them to those opportunities too. The last thing I want to end on, so, you know, our organization, Lead for Minnesota, we support people like Amber, who has this spirit of like, how can I give and contribute to my place? And it's infectious, right? I think we all know that like so much of our work happens because we have steering committees where there's like 1 or 2 people who are like, we're gonna move this forward and get it to happen. And so I think the future for the next generation of rural communities is you got to get the Ambers in your steering committees. So in ways that we can partner with you to help you find Ambers and bring them back home through the fellowship program, awesome. Another thing that we're building out right now too, does anyone here know what the Lyceum movement is? Just like that, like Lyceum. So the history of that is that in the early 19th century, a farmer named Josiah Holbrook in Connecticut repurposed his farmhouse because he was like 60 miles away from any college. And he was like saying, you know, rural working people need to also be asking big questions about what it means to live in a community together. What is the good life? They deserve to be talking about philosophy and art and history. And so in its height, it grew to 3,000 Lyceum It's like, we don't want to hear about the license. But where is that place, that third space to put some urban like planning turns into it outside of your church and outside of your legion, where in the 21st century people can start gathering together again? I'll pause there, but
Yeah, we want to, you know, ask for questions, but also I just want to really quickly, because I can never remember. I bet you can, but in our 7-county area, how many fellows are there with Lead for Minnesota?
that includes the IRA. Yeah. We currently have 6 fellows
Yeah.
across that, or 7. 7 fellows across this region.
Kind of, I mean, it's building rapidly what Amber is doing, what our rural communities are connecting to. We'd love to answer some questions if you have some for us.
Go ahead. I read the Lead with Hospitality. It's a book by Taylor Scott, and I'm reading it now. And in a conference Bloomington, Minnesota Convention of Bureaus, was talking about welcoming and inviting and leading with hospitality in whatever organization you serve. And I think that we're just talking here about, you know, how we serve being welcoming, inviting in our community. And since majority of us are transplants, you know, what was our experience of coming to a place that we weren't from, and do other people believe we're from here finally? And so it's just interesting what you're saying. My question, I guess, you guys is, who serves that? Is it a community group that just appoints themselves? Is it a nonprofit that leads that? Like in Waseca, do you have a group that's leading that? Is it a foundation? Is it the chamber? Is it the tourism bureau? You know, who? I guess that's what you know, because we're happy too. We don't have capacity to take it on but we like to be a part of it, you know, and what that looks like.
You know, actually, we have some of our fellows are doing that. We have a fellow in Waseca where that actually is like her scope of work and is her mission. So because I think to your point, it's not just one of those organizations. Like each of them have inroads, right, of newcomers that are coming to experience your community. And I think sometimes half the battle, even in a small community, there are so many silos of experience. Her work as a fellow was to come in and be the linchpin between the chamber, the city committee, and is helping us kickstart Lyceum conversations in one of our downtown buildings that will be hosting this type of series every month. Just because I can't see you.
I just think it's so different in every community, and you know, can be done in so many ways. So when I got to go down and kind of shadow what was happening in Region 5 and Region 9, and in those areas, it was kind of started and birthed out of their Regional Development Commission, right, their RDC. And so that's where North Span got inspired. And so not everyone knows this, but we were birthed by ARDC in 1985 to kind of do the community side of things. They do transportation planning, aging, et cetera. So I've been trying to figure out, you know, kind of like what has been that best practice. Now, as we learn about the 7-county area, which is massive, right? There are so many organizations doing parts of this, or directly, I would say, exactly welcoming work, but maybe never recognize it that way. Like, how do I help people feel like they belong in our community or welcoming? So helping to connect those groups, especially from the Twin Ports area into the full region, and just like, you're not alone in this work. And how do we do that together? For our 7 counties, we are building an advisory committee that's about 30 people from those different groups to then be able to reach out even further past that to help connect those groups, because it's not North Span's not going to do this work, right? It's going to be everybody else that's doing it. But just 2 years ago, the Voices for Ethnic and Multicultural Awareness, VEMA, in Chisholm, you know, in Hibbing area, like they didn't exist 2 years ago. So that movement is really happening, and it's really exciting to see in our rural communities. But it doesn't. Anyone can do it. You know, anyone can say, hey, you guys want to come for dinner tonight? You know, so it just depends on where that starts and where it spurs from. I think in Region 9, it started from that organizational level. And now that whole welcoming initiative is ran by the community members. So it's pretty cool. Like they're just taking it and continuing to do it. They're doing the equity summits and everything all on their own.
I figured it was probably more of a grassroots
Yeah.
movement. So what you talked about doing that pop-up, so I know a local Pakistani family that would love to do that, would love to partner with a commercial kitchen and do a takeover and do a maybe once a quarter. And I would love that. I think that's great. Walker does ethnic days and they have this group of people that come to town to celebrate their heritage with other people. And I think that we need more of that. And I think it would help us be more welcoming and invited. I think that change is hard for people. Tamara and I talked about this a lot, you know, what does that look like from a workforce? Bringing in a different workforce that looks different than us. We're gonna have to do something. You have an ASB and this Huber company coming to town, that's gonna be 400, 500 jobs by the time we're done. Where do we find those people, right? So housing and childcare is an issue, but welcoming and inviting is just as big of an issue. And I am concerned about it. What does that look like?
So I think a lot of, so I'm from Hill City, tiny Hill City, and I'm gonna pick on my friend Brian Moon in the audience, because Big Park to me is such a cool example of how they kind of flipped community and economic development on its head. And I know that Tim Johnson could be here today, but he's a great leader in what they've done. So how do you spark that type of activity in more of our smaller communities? Because, you know, I'll say this example, I'd say with a lot of love, I'm a part of the Lions Club, probably one of 3 women. I gotta be the youngest by like 2 decades. So how do we take, and that organization in the city is like the welcoming committee, right? And they're wonderful people, but they just, you know, the meeting takes place in a bar and it's not an environment you would bring your kids to. It's in the evening. It's not meant to be there to say, hey, move to my community, join the Lions Club, right? It's like the older gentleman's club in the town. So how do you break through? Because we are fraught with these communities. We have Grand Rapids and an island in the middle of 10 tiny little communities like this. So how do we get in there and really inject them with that sense of, because it's not just Grand Rapids, right? These are places where people that are coming and working in Grand Rapids they're living, right? They're living in Nashwauk, they're living in FE. They're living in all these spots that should be there to welcome them. And in many cases, they're taking their kids and going to Grand Rapids and they're doing everything here. So how do you bridge that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, you know, if you're the you tomorrow or the Sarah or whoever in that community, the opportunity is to ask the newer people in the community, whoever they are, how they want to get connected to community, because it is changing. How people want to get connected and want to be part of community, unfortunately, is not always the Alliance or Rotary or whatever. So understanding like what like that community led initiative, like though if you could gather the 5 new people in the community and say, if you could do anything in your community, what would it be? It unfortunately probably isn't join the Lions Club. It's just a very different sense of service than it was for, you know, even my generation or my parents' generation. So to learn from them what they want to do and then be able to say, hey, Lions or Rotary, is this something you would do?
Yeah.
Like that, I think is where you might be able to bridge those gaps. But if it's not coming from that community-led side, you're not going to see that engagement.
Yeah. As a Rotary Club member, who is the youngest one in my Rotary Club, Hotdish and I are both in our Rotaries. Yeah, so we had 2 younger professionals now be the past 2 presidents, and they totally changed the meeting structure. Rather than meeting in the same spot once a week, they have on the 1st and 3rd day, it is like the regular meeting where it's at lunch at the golf club. And then like the second is like a morning meeting where you're talking about like what it is, it's like the causes breakfast. And then the last one is going to the cool bar in downtown, right? So they like, I think, realize that if they're going to create, if they want more members, they have to, like, you can't keep meeting the same way that you have for so many other generations. And I think it takes the people on those clubs to be able to say, like, let's go, like, we got to do something different. And part of it too, I think what was really cool with those 2 leaders is that, you know, they started meeting with me, and before asking me to join Rotary, because I think they also knew that like, if they asked me to join at not the right time when they haven't made those like changes, then like I or anyone else like could come and be like, yeah, this is just not for me. So they did that work and like did that restructuring, informed by what would it take to get these new members, and then like let's start designing it. I think also like a cool thing is to, I've got the stop sign,
We do have a little bit of a cushion. Right now.
and see, but I think the pop-up idea is so cool. Of like, we did for the whole month of June, every weekend was a different type of activity just to learn what stuck. And like we took over a parking lot at the back of a pub in town, and then had a band come out and play. And like no one has just seen that parking lot space. So I think people were coming and it's like, oh, this is what you could do here. And like I hope that those seeds will start saying, maybe we could have a downtown promenade. But I think sometimes jumping to those bigger things sometimes is a little tougher if you can't see it happen in small pockets. We did a bachata night too at our local taqueria, where we just moved all the tables, and like the guys in the back of the kitchen like started singing karaoke and then taught us how to bachata dance. And it was like some people were just coming for tacos, and it was like now I needed to watch people bachata dance. But I think it's just like part of it is like doing it and seeing what happens, and not everything will stick because it shouldn't, but it's just cool to see what is possible.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, we were well over.